So shall we
Yes.
open up and ask people who would like to both tell stories and or ask Kate some questions? But thank you. This has been just
Thank you so much,
wonderful,
Susan.
Kate, to have the
Thank you.
conversation. Yes.
Would you comment on the phenomena that occurs when a matriarch or a patriarch dies and a family that has been so-called in balance for generations goes berserk, turns into werewolves, devours each other, and never speaks to many relatives again? Would you comment on that?
Do you want to say more?
There are stories.
I think you could be way more eloquent than I can. Just to say, it's so primitive, right? It just touches into feelings of love and getting our needs met, and it's an enactment of years of experiences and the interpersonal dynamics that kind of stay contained, right? Somewhat under the surface, at least, and then the money comes to play, and we're all I don't know, beasts. We're demons, huh?
I said we regress.
We regress, exactly. Thank you. We regress, and the unfairness and the debts and the indebtedness and all of that comes to play, and it happens, right, time and time again,
So how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
What, do you have any?
I can tell you what happened in my family. I don't think it's a model. It's hard, you know, and I think the best we can do is to be as conscious of our own part in that and our own feelings, and when we can be compassionate about why other people are acting the way they do. Some families can talk about it, actually, you know, but a lot can't. So, you know, and we can be proactive. We can talk with the matriarch or the patriarch before they die to try to influence so that things are left in a more equitable way or a fair way. And so there's the least amount of you know, legal problems, but I think it's really hard. I'm full of stories from yesterday, but this woman who said her father, again, there are stories before and after this, but her father married one of her childhood friends, and left all of his money to his then wife, her former friend, and she just died, and she's leaving a little bit of money. You know, I don't know how much, but a little bit of money to this woman, and nothing to her siblings. So we all talked about, oh, isn't that interesting? What is that money? You know, it's kind of like hush money, we thought. It was like, you know, there's some kind of payback to this one friend, but it creates, to her former friend, but it creates all these other entanglements. And I think that, you know, because we're so unconscious about what influences our behavior with money, there are lots of nasty things that get played out in wills, and that are sometimes intentionally meant to cause problems.
Yeah. Boy, the stories about that could go on and on and on. Yes.
Yes, I have a question. Do you see money as energy, and if you do, how can we have that energy flow more fluidly?
Great question. I'm going to restate the question just in case people didn't hear that. So, asking if you see money as energy, and if so, how can we make that energy flow better or more?
I think there are people who've written much more on money as energy, know much more than I do, but absolutely I see it as energy. And my belief is that looking at the emotional blocks helps to make money flow better. You know, just the simple exercise of giving your having money in your right hand, which you give to your left hand, right? Placing the money in your left hand, receiving it, and then giving the money from your left hand to your right hand. They're simple exercises of playing with receiving, giving and receiving, and then being out in the world. Well, I think when we appreciate, I've learned so much about money from being in the bookstore. I am supported by, I'm gonna, start tearing. I am supported, literally supported, and energetically supported by everyone who buys a book at Point Reyes Books. I am supported by everyone who buys a book at an independent bookstore, because we are all fighting for our survival. So when you support another independent bookstore, you're supporting Point Reyes Books. That appreciation that I cannot make it on my own, right? I need other people to support me, be they clients or customers of the bookstore, changed for me how money feels energetically. So that when I give money I'm very conscious of where I spend my money and who I support. And that, for me, feels like it's the right flow for me. That's not to say that's the right flow for everybody, but that's the right flow for me, is to, it makes for a rich interconnectedness. So looking at perhaps where we each are blocked, doing the emotional work, I think really helps with the flow of money. Why do we have trouble receiving? Do we have trouble giving? Right? Do we worry too much and don't deal with it enough? Right? Are we too much inward, or are we too much outward? Looking at all the different possible balances, and then when we come across something that feels like we can't look at it, or it's really underdeveloped, working with it emotionally. But it's an amazing vehicle for connecting us to one another. The barter system is great, but what I love about money is that I don't need to have exactly what you want in order for us, and you have exactly what I want for there to be an exchange. You give me the money for what I have, and then I get to spend it with so many different people. I get to have an energetic, emotional, however, political, spiritual relationship with all these people, and it's this way that it interconnects us. And that when we go to Target, when we go to Safeway, we may not have as direct an experience of that, though even though it's still there. But when I shop in a smaller store, and I know that more of those dollars are staying locally, and I know the person it's a joy. It's actually a joy, and it's not the thing itself. It's the sharing the wealth. It's the keeping the flow going. Micah.
Well, of course, a lot of things coming up for me in this discussion. And one is just the joy of just like filling up my car with gas. It's so satisfying, and I wonder if it comes from that fear that someday I'll be eating cat food, that woman. But because money taking care of your needs can be really satisfying, even when it's not frivolous. And the other thing was inheriting money in a whole other way from people who never shared it with you, and then they die, and then you inherit the money, and you feel like it's not your money at all, because it never was kind of given to you. So I've been through that one, which is, I still haven't really come to terms with. And I'm wondering, when you keep saying you did a workshop yesterday, where you do workshops, the accessibility of your workshops.
So I have a website, which is EmotionalCurrency.com, and it lists the upcoming workshop. There's one in Point Reyes coming up, so I do workshops in Point Reyes. I do workshops in San Francisco. I'm going to do a workshop in Bellingham and Seattle and Santa Fe.
We can all go to one in Santa Fe.
Yeah,
I don't know, the race is
Good shopping.
really good. Yeah, that's right, good shopping. One of the things though too, Micah, that you said that I think was interesting, and Kate, you've probably come across this too in your work, is when someone who's had money and who's never shared it with you, you know, it's never been sort of a part of your relationship with them, then leaves that money to you. Whether, you know, you thought maybe it would have been nice to have had that sharing earlier in the relationship, but, you know, what talk about that a little bit too, what that means.
So again, it's so individual, right? I mean, my dad didn't believe in really, he wasn't helped financially, so he didn't believe in helping me. So the money that I did get, I mean, I totally relate, you know, it's not the same as someone who can share and support you and have that experience with you. And I think there's some, on my part, I think there's some anger, you know, there are a lot of different emotions, right? There's anger, there's a sense of it not being personal, it's not being money of the heart. I you know, understanding my dad and why he was like that helped me some, and but it's still, it's a paradoxical experience of feeling that someone withheld so much that even when they gave to you, that there's the withholding is embedded in it. So I what I do is I just write. I wrote about my dad again, you know, yesterday, and I wrote about the kind of seeing some other piece, because like anything emotional, as we, you know, go along in life, things look different as we reflect back on it. So I had an understanding that helped me feel better about my dad yet again, holding the dark and the light, and not denying our own experience, but having some insight into what made that person the way they were,
Right.
why they had to hoard it or hold on to it or not give it. And you know, my dad, I'd go to the grocery store with him. I was cooking a meal for him, and he wouldn't buy the bag of groceries. You know, I as a step-parent, I would buy the bag of groceries. As the daughter, I wanted him to buy the bag of, you know, $20, buy the bag of groceries. But he couldn't do that. And so how wounding that was to me continually. But in fact, my dad loved me, you know. He just couldn't get his wallet out.
Good thing they're not connected, right? Okay, what other questions and stories too? I mean, the stories can really enliven the conversation, please.
Yeah, I've got a story. 2 years ago, I was in a really serious car accident and unable to work for, or ended up being a year. And the lead up to this, I'm self-employed and very independent. Didn't have a good relationship with my mum in England. And I'd applied for disability insurance on a financial advisor's advice. I'd been turned down for various reasons. I happened to have my car accident in a state where I wasn't going to get any money from it. So there's 2 states in the whole of the US where you don't get money if you're rear-ended. So here I was, paralysed on my couch, unable to move, and having to ask my mum for help because all the other doors have been closed. And when she has money, she's inherited money, and I had to write a very careful letter to her because I just didn't want it to be a begging letter. And so I composed the letter over several days, and also tried to control things that my sister wouldn't intervene and try and be the go-between, and I said, you can show this to my sister, but don't ask her advice. Well, of course it arrives and my sister's there with her having tea. So, every way that I try to control it, it doesn't happen. And then, she calls me up immediately and she says, look, how much do you need? So I spent the rest of my year recovering, being supported by my mum, and a lot of healing came out of that situation, which I would never have dreamed could have happened any other way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a wonderful story.
The gifts of money.
Yes.
Other questions, comments?
Stacy.
Kate, I have a question. Knowing what you know today, how would you handle your father? Would you handle him in a different way? Would you visit with him? Would you open up dialogue in a different way with him today if you had him here?
Yeah, I think I would tell him about my experience, not from a place, I'd have to be where I am today, which is, I don't need him to take care of me. Emotionally, I'm not driven for him to take care of me. But I think I'd be honest with him about what my experience was. And so that also he could tell me about his experience. If I could have understood how his father dying young and going through the depression. What I wrote about yesterday was he lived in Winnipeg when his dad died, and then he moved to Santa Monica. And my dad was very handsome and social, and I think his life was this trajectory of having fun, having a good life. And when things got hard, my dad disappeared, So I think if I had understood how, I'm going to cry, but how that was the main driving motivation of my dad, then it would have helped me to see that he, help my hurt, help heal my hurt. It's about understanding each other. We all have, all the generations of gain and loss and the historical periods that we lived through and what the economy is doing and, religion, race, gender, just so much. And these stories help us to interpret what happens in different ways than it's all about me. Because it feels as if it's all about me. It's not to say that I needed my dad to support me more. Financially, but I needed him to not be as withdrawn. But given that he couldn't be anything but who he was, if I could have appreciated his story more, I think it wouldn't have been as traumatic to me.
It's interesting when we think about parents and their relationship to money and how that affects us, and our children and their relationship to money and how that has come about. My son and I have such a different way of looking at money. I wonder where he came from. He is such a tightwad, and he is so careful about every penny that he spends. We went on a vacation one time where it was all inclusive, one of these places where you can have as much food as you wanted. And he was 20 years old. He was devastated to know that I had to pay for that. He thought it really all came free. And so it was okay for him to eat anything he wanted. But then when he found out we were paying for it, it totally changed his relationship to the vacation. And so, I think it's fascinating to think about, from a psychological perspective, where our own relationship for money comes from.
Yeah.
How much of it comes from what we observe in our family, and where else these roots are that guide or shape our own relationship to money. Surely you've seen lots of interesting examples of that.
Well, and that he probably, I would assume that early on he showed some of these signs with money. Do you remember?
Yeah,
Did he have a savings account or he kept?
Absolutely. He got money when he graduated from high school that he still has 5 years later. He just, he doesn't part with money easily at all.
So, and these things are not you know, we talk about them in terms of problems. Sometimes they're not problems. Sometimes it's accepting who we are, it's accepting our personality,
Yeah.
and working within that, working with that, and then just at least noticing the ways it costs us. You know, that if there are things, if we're more like Susan's son, that if there are things that we regret not having done, or ways that we need to indulge ourselves sometimes, and just working a little to transform that. You know, working a little to open it. It's not like we have to overhaul the whole engine. You know, sometimes we just need to work to play with it. You know, it'd be interesting to give him some money for Christmas or something, and just say, I want you to play with this and have a completely different experience. Not worry about how much, you know, go out to dinner, not worry about how much anything on the menu costs. Don't even look at that. To have a different experience, and you know that we get quite caught in habits, and that sometimes there's something that we're missing in our diet that we need. That how we handle money keeps us from having an experience. And so plain, you know, I say in the book, it can be as simple as spending cash instead of using your credit card all the time, or buying something really expensive in whatever your personal economy is, you know, whatever expensive is, buying it and letting yourself have the range of reactions to buying something expensive. So just, you know, and having a conversation with your son about, how did you get that way? We're so different. Isn't it interesting how different we are? And what is that like for each of us when we're interacting around money?
Fortunately, they're mostly comical kinds of interchanges, but yes.
One of the things that I've noticed in relationships with people is that whether it's realistic or not, each person I know comes from a space of having grown up feeling like they had a safety net, a financial safety net, that if something like a little bit about what Kate was saying about whether you would be rescued or not financially in a situation, and then other people grow up feeling that safety net is not there, that there is no safety net and you are your own safety net. And I don't think it necessarily bears any resemblance to how wealthy your family is, or how well off you've been growing up, or maybe even any reality about whether your parents would really rescue you, you know, in a situation. Like you were saying about having to ask your mother. I just think that each person, for, you know, cues that may be totally irrational, that we grow up either feeling that safety net is there or not feeling that safety net is there, and it really influences everything we do around money.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And there's a story about a woman who has fantasies of being the bag lady, and she has to look at where they come from because she does have a safety net. You know, what is contributing to that currently. But I think you're absolutely right that sense, and culturally too, you know, people who grow up in England, for example, you know, there's some sense that there's medical care, there's more help if you need help. Here, we're so much each person for themselves, that we're protecting our family, but we don't have the safety net. So it's another influence sometimes. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that a little bit. I mean, it brings up a lot of stuff personally. I can think of stories and stuff that it's hitting. But on a cultural level and political level, I see, it feels like there's another attack. I'm not saying it's never been that way before, but on people who are poor. And you see it politically all over the place. And some of it's shocking to me because I grew up in the 60s, and it felt like incrementally we were moving towards goals and ideals that we were all in this together and we were helping one another. And it seems now that there is such a backlash of people who don't want unemployment insurance, attacking labor rights, attacking all kinds of safety nets, and people thinking, like, I don't want my money going towards helping anybody else. I did it by myself, which I think is an illusion. And it's really, and I used to teach history, and I think that an unconscious thread of this is actually Calvinism, and the Puritans and Calvinism, and this idea that you were talking about if you're an okay person if you are successful, and you're not a good person if you're poor, those emotional issues. But Calvinism basically was the beginning of a lot of, was the religion in a lot of the Western, in the Eastern states. And that was basically God, if you were successful, God showed he favored you by making you have money. And if you were poor, it meant that God didn't love you, basically.
And it was the men. I mean, it was the men who were successful.
That's
And
right, because
they
women
were-
couldn't even vote. They couldn't work, they couldn't vote, they
Right.
couldn't own anything. They were property.
So I think the notion of the self-made man is just such untruth.
It's such
I was going to say myth, but that's
Yeah.
the wrong use of the word myth. It's such a fabrication, because those men were supported by all their relationships with other people, including their wives and their children, who were working together. So that
But
it's
it's
a
interesting
thread in
that
the
the
country.
religion, and you see that, and this isn't everybody, but a lot of the people that are politically acting in this way are people that are from the religious right. I'm not necessarily saying all of it, or people who are religious necessarily act that way, but there is this thread, and I don't think it's conscious.
Well, it's an incredibly
Today.
greedy time, and it's an incredibly scary time, and the haves and the have-nots are the
Fastest
largest
growing
discrepancy,
demographic.
and there are more and more
Yeah.
people who are poor. So it's that's very sad. It's very sad.
Back here, there's another, someone had, yes, please.
Yeah, I was just thinking of, it's more on a micro level, but I was thinking of this particular friend I have. She's a dear friend, and we, do things together, like especially we go to the dog park and walk the dog, and, she was a dancing, we took dance classes together, so we do lots of stuff, but I have found that there's this real annoying thing that happens a lot with her, and this is just, like this a little micro vision into a friendship, is that, I might have, I don't care if it's, a mixed bag of nuts or something I have with me on the hike, or maybe it's an apple, but she'll ask me, oh, where'd you get that? And I'll say, well, I stopped at Whole Foods. Otherwise, she goes, oh man, how much did you pay for that? And I'll say, well, I don't know, maybe, she said, oh, but you can go to, Trader Joe's, and it's probably, you get it so much cheaper. I said, yeah, but I would have to drive, it would take me an hour, because I gotta stand in line, and this is something that comes up a lot, and it has gotten to the point sometimes where it waters down kind of the experience what I'm having, whether it's a choice of where we go for a meal, or what. It's always about cutting and cutting and getting the best cost, which is her value, and my value is maybe time and quality. And so there's always this kind of dance and a little bit of friction about where do we, how do we share. I don't know. I don't know I kind of know what to do with this anxiety she has about what's my experience and the cost of what I paid to have that experience.
And do you think you could have a conversation with her to just, in as neutral a way as you can, to say that I've noticed these comments and I wonder, what are you saying to me, or where does that come from?
Yeah.
I mean, you want to be sensitive, because we have different amounts of money, right? And so
But she has more than me.
Oh, she has more than you.
She has more than me. That's the weird part.
I think it's a great opening. you know, to say, I noticed these comments, or tell me what happens to you when I buy this bag at Whole Foods. Tell me what's your response to that?
Yeah.
And to hear from her. Is that her mother's voice, her father's voice? Is that her voice? What, you know, to really find out about the judgment about it, because it will shift how it is for you. And I think, you know, you can say, you know, I know we don't talk about money. You know, we're not used to. I went to this talk the other day, and this, right, came to mind.
It's fault.
I think it's a great. But it's a great opportunity because it's not something that there's not a big conflict here, right? It's just a casual comment that she's making, but making repeatedly. So it's important to her, and to understand her, let alone, you know, feel okay about your bag of mix, you know, trail mix. You know, talking about it would be really interesting. Let me know. Okay. Says with trepidation.
You've just given me the perfect opening for the question that I've been trying to figure out how to ask. And I want to go back and pick up that thread of having the conversation.
Yeah.
Which was one of the, I think that was the first piece of advice that you answered Susan's question with. And this is something that we don't talk about, and you were saying maybe the first thing to do is just to have more conversations. And it might not be the same friend that you talk to about money as a person who can help you with one of these other big areas that we all live through. And you've been so open with your own story, and I really appreciate what you've done with that in the book as well as today. But in the book, you talk about a conversation that you had once that was actually hurtful.
Yeah.
And I think you said you hadn't been able to make it safe for yourself to have that conversation. So I would really love it if you talk a little bit more about how to initiate those conversations, how to make them safe. But this is, you know, we're watching a wonderful one right now, and we're hearing a flow that feels safe and wonderful and really full of lots of rich things. But if we go out, I mean, how do I go out and start having this conversation and make it safe for me and safe for the other person, maybe without this kind of wonderful opening on the trail that our friend here just.
Well, I do think acknowledging that money's really hard to talk about, and but that you've been noticing that you have a lot of reactions or feelings about it, and that you want to talk with whoever this is, the father, the mother, the friend, the coworker, and I'm sharing some piece about yourself. You know, something about what you're up against, or what you're dealing with, or what keeps you up in the middle of the night is a really good place to start, I think. Some vulnerability, moving it into a different realm where it's not, you know, tit for tat or competition. In the book, I talk about having done that some with someone, and she asked me how much I made. And I told her. So I thought it was safe enough to tell her. And she, I can't remember what she said, but something like, oh, only that much? You know, oh, is that all? And then she didn't tell me how much she made. So it does have the potential, these conversations can kind of be deal breakers, right? This is someone who I could no longer, I still have a relationship with a person, but I could no longer feel intimate with, because for me, someone who is that competitive with me is not safe, right? I think there are other people. I mean, it's the beauty of the workshop is everyone in that room wants to talk about money, wants to have a conversation. But I would imagine that you could figure out in your own life 1, 2, 3 people who you have a sense would welcome a conversation like this, right? Who could engage. And then you go out and you make inroads. Or it could be like this woman, that there's an issue between you with someone else, between you and someone else, where that's calling for attention. So it's like being courageous, you know, it pays off emotionally to be courageous. As Angelus Arian said, that's my heart beating. It has to do with our heart, our core. And so it to live in our hearts, we need to be courageous and talk about these issues when they come up. Friendships where there's great inequalities, you know, in what we have and how we spend and what we value. It's grist for the mill. It's a richness. It's not all a problem. The woman who talked about, Mom finally came through. How healing. It's so healing to have these conversations. Not with everybody, you know, but begin and see, and they won't all turn out well, but the ones that do, it will be so deepening. It will be so enriching, and you will feel, this woman yesterday said, I feel both, I feel a lot of ick, and I feel relief, and I feel enlivened, you know? So there's all that ick about money, but there's also so much heart and soul, and it's so enlivening. And so it's doing it within ourselves, and then taking it out with others, because you know, we can only do so much with ourselves. We have to also include other people as well.
Well, and it speaks to, you know, going back to one of the earlier parts of our conversation, how vulnerable we are when we talk about money. And there's something about opening up our vulnerability to someone else, which is part of what these conversations are. And how that can put you in a difficult place, but it can also really increase the bond that you have with someone when that's treated with great care. And then, as you said, your heart opens.
You said a great comment. When I first talked about shame and money, I realized that I would feel safer. I was more comfortable getting up in front of the audience and taking my clothes off than I would be telling how much money I had. That's how vulnerable we are, right? You can imagine, I really would not want to be naked in front of
I was just thinking which one I'd rather do.
So, right, recognizing the degree of vulnerability that we feel, but not letting that stop us.
I see a hand and I don't see the head attached to it, please.
We all admit that we have this ambivalence to money. And considering the culture we're in, where there's a lot of commercialism and consumerism and all of that, going forward, it's a cycle, a vicious one. We see this happening in our grandparents, parents, and all of that. How will we then, knowing all of this and being aware of all of this, how can we help guide our young ones to a future where there is this? I really don't know whether we can resolve all of this in one generation, but at least to help the young, instead of getting sucked into the consumerism that we see now, having this more what, I don't know what the word is, how they deal with money, which is a little bit different than what we have gone through in our own lifetime. I just wondered how you would.
Yeah, well, I think it's a wonderful question and probably really good answers in the audience. I'm humbled. I was a step parent, but I think it's such a vital question, and I don't have a lot of answers. But I think that certainly living by example is important. You know, there's what we were taught as children, and then what we observed, and that often there's a discrepancy in what our parents, the values they upheld, and how they behaved. So trying to have our behaviors aligned with our values. Working on appreciation and diminishing the sense of deprivation, and again, letting other values be important in our lives. The pressures that these kids have on them to have, the way that self and commodity is interwoven is absolutely much more intense than it was for us. Saying no is really important. Understanding, to say no to them when we can. Understanding why it's hard for us to say no to our kids. Someone in a book reading recently talked about his grandmother who would give money to, she would call all the grandchildren into the room. She would give money to her favorites and not to the others. And he was one of the unfavored grandchildren. So with his, he recognizes, he was sitting in the audience, that with his daughter, he's been unable to say no to her because, of course, he needed to show his love that way. So seeing the ways that we're out of balance with our kids, I think is important. Having, the sense of entitlement, a lot of people, especially in wealthier communities, like Marin, talk about how entitled the kids are. So having money, helping them learn that you earn money for work. Something that's pretty simple and elementary, but a lot of us don't learn. So not using money to reward necessarily for getting the A's or the B's or being good, but having them earn money, I think is really important. And I think staying away from media, helping them stay unplugged so that they can have an experience of nature and of relationship and family, because it's really hard to come by. I think talking is one of these places where talking with other parents, and grandparents is really will help give ideas for how you help the kids, and financial education, helping them learn about credit cards and checks and savings accounts and investments, helping them get grounded.
Yes, Marion.
Yeah, and just an idea too is starting at an early age to give the children a little bit of money to give away.
Yes.
Starting at an early age in the school, encouraging the school to have a fund where the children decide what's important in the community that needs to be helped, and then they give it away.
So I'm so glad that was brought in, because I haven't really talked about giving money. It's a huge healing, a huge connecting, a huge feeling that we are in this together. Someone used that language, we are in this together, and that we are responsible for ourselves, but we're also responsible for helping those others who have not been given the opportunities that we have been given, who are in need for whatever reasons, who are in need. Recognizing that we all can be in need, right? It doesn't take much for any of us to be dependent on others. It's an accident away. It's economic recession away. It's
An earthquake away.
yeah.
It's interesting, Marion, what you said. I have a friend who lost her son to cancer when he was a college student. And they started a family foundation, and most of the board members are his friends who are now in their young 20s. And what they've done, they've been great about earning money, as you often see in this sort of situation. But what these parents have done that I think has been such a gift is this young board of directors then makes the decisions about the grants and goes to the place and gives them the check and is a part of the full process. So earning the money, making decisions about spending it, and being there to give it to them. And it has been the most rich experience for those young people. I've been amazed at how extraordinary it's been for them.
Well, that's beautiful, and it makes me think too, for your son, I was thinking if you gave him money that he has to give to somebody else to give away,
Uh-huh.
that could be an interesting exercise.
He's actually pretty good about giving it away. He's just terrible about spending it. I mean, I should worry, right? But I'll try that with something that's, his own money, and then we'll see how that works. But it's a good idea, thank you.
I heard of, from the mother, that her daughter had read the book and that for her birthday, she asked for money that she could give philanthropically.
Oh, wow. That's just great.
It was very heartening to me.
Yes, it is.
But
Yes,
again,
it
it is the heal. For some of us, it's the healing. It's the balancing.
Well, we probably have time for one more question or comment. 2 more. Okay.
Well, a few things come up for me, but one is loaning money and not just giving it. I'm wondering, which I tend to do, I don't know how not to loan money a lot of times, and my friends judge it a lot. And it strikes me that the reason it's difficult to talk about money is everybody has judgments on each other about how they handle their money, if they spend it all on big dinners, or someone like me buys clothing, or, whatever it is, everybody has feelings, and that starts really young with your family judging you. But another thing I wanted to bring up was that I had to leave America and go to a third world country to find out that being poor didn't mean you were lazy. Because I think in this country there's this stigma that if you're not making money, you're just lazy. And it's
And
just
then
not.
it's your fault.
And then I remember meeting people who chose not to make money or a lot of money, and it was really shocking the first few times. And then there used to be a book that was quite popular called Voluntary Simplicity, I think it was called, when I first came here. That was kind of a choice of a lot of people in Bolinas. Just another aspect of it all.
And just to tag on that, there's this denigration of making money using your hands as opposed to your mind, and the pay scale is such a different pay scale. And both are needed, right?
That's right.
Yeah. I'm really stuck, I'm finding that really strong right now.
Especially in this culture, in this
Right.
country. One last word.
Well, I was just going to comment about, and it's interesting to follow some of the things you've been saying, but I used to, sometimes I'll hold some inspirational gatherings at my house for just when the news gets really bad. And one of the things we've watched, I've brought people together at my house to watch, is the CNN Heroes Awards, which they, once a year, they honor somebody. And it's brought me to tears every time to see that, because I always grew up, I grew up sort of lower middle class. And so I never knew that you didn't have to have a lot of money to give money away. And seeing these people and these cultures, these other cultures, which are much more heart-connected than we are, of these people who just feel a call. They see hungry people, they decide to open a kitchen in their own home on a shoestring. They're working people, they don't have a lot. It's broken my heart. I mean, it's opened my heart and broken my heart at the same time. It's amazing to watch something like that and see people from all over the world doing these amazing things to help people. And then it just takes one person with enough heart, with enough motivation or a feeling of calling to do it. It doesn't necessarily.
And it's not at all true, it's just the wealthy who give money. I mean, people who live very marginally give up much higher percent, give more often than people who are wealthy.
That was a real eye-opener to see that.
It's a real antidote for cynicism, isn't it? It's great. Well, thank you all for being a part of this, and Kate, once again, thank you for
Thank you.
joining us.